Any early stage founder pitching their company who has your pedigree of team, Patrick, whatever the hell you're going to say, it's going to be like, take my money. I don't care what they're building. They're going to figure it out. Should have been the first slide.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a spotlight episode.
Hey, I'm Chris Sard.
I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
I'm Patrick Murphy.
And on this week's Spotlight show, we're going to talk to an incredible company who's raised money from Reid, Hoffman, and some incredible Silicon Valley VCs. You're going to find out exactly what their pitch is like, why it worked, and some advice from Yaniv and I in terms of how you can adapt it to your startup so that you can raise real cash and have a real awesome outcome. So all of that and much more straight after the break. Stay tuned.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance with SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
All right. Welcome to another episode of Spotlight on the Startup Podcast. Now, we haven't done a lot of these, but they're actually very, very popular episodes, so we're really excited to do this. We have Patrick Murphy with us. We don't know anything about the startup. This is, remember guys, this is a mock VC interview, VC pitch. Patrick's come in to tell us, ignorant VCs who haven't done our homework, all about his company, and hopefully keep us entertained and keep us convinced that he's building something awesome. Along the way, we'll sort of break character and we might make some commentary on why what Patrick said is really compelling for VCs, or maybe there's a stronger way he could have said what he said to help founders sort of understand how the VC pitch works. And of course, Patrick, you're really uniquely qualified to do this because you've recently raised money in Silicon Valley from some of the best VCs in the world, including Blitzscaling, which is, of course, our friend Jeremiah Ouyang is the partner there, and it's backed by Reid Hoffman, one of the best AI funds in the world. So if you're raising capital for an AI company, you need to talk to them and talk to Jeremiah over there. So thank you to him for introducing us.
Fantastic.
So Patrick, before we get started, obviously you've raised money on this pitch and for this company. So just to establish your bona fides a little bit, if you're willing to share, how much have you raised so far, from who, where are you guys at, so that as people listen to the story, they can understand your credibility there?
So we've raised about 2 million Canadian to date. Some really, really good investors, primarily based in the States. We're a Techstars company. National Association of Realtors through the REACH program is one of our investors as well. Obviously, Reid Hoffman through Blitzscaling Ventures, an investor. And we really have some key angel investors as well within the team. But we really pride ourselves on we've been very capital efficient, right? That's from being in Quebec, in Canada. We have government subsidies behind us for the Quebec government and the Canadian government. So we've been able to combine dilutive and non-dilutive together to be able to get to an interesting spot right now.
All right, let's jump into it. Welcome to our lovely offices. You've been given a drink. You've set up your laptop. Your presentation's on the wall. Tell us who the hell you are and what you're doing.
Fantastic. So it's going to be a quick overview of what we're building, and to be able for you to grasp really what we're building, the magnitude of what we're doing. I'll actually do a little bit of storytelling here. So if that works for you guys, I'm going to start presenting, and obviously we'll be able to go back and forth with any questions that you have. Does that work?
That sounds perfect.
Fantastic. So I want to give you a little bit of context. Do you remember the days back in 2013 where if you wanted to design a flyer or a logo, it meant hiring a graphic designer? Well, in 2013, Canva came in and changed the world forever, allowing anybody to design, create, and share beautiful designs without having to hire a graphic designer. We're doing the same thing with architecture in 2025 and bringing that transformation, allowing anybody to plan and design their new home renovation without having to hire an architect. Currently, if you want to design or build a home, you need to study architecture, learn tools like AutoCAD, SketchUp, Rhino, Revit. You need to design your floor plans from scratch. You need to export those floor plans for feedback, and then spend thousands of dollars on 3D rendering fees, or hire an architect like Steph. He's one of my co-founders. This really creates a massive gap in the market for a tool that is both architecturally compliant and cost effective. What we're doing here is we're making architecture the way that it should be: generative, collaborative, and really remarkably simple. Since launching our platform in 2023, over now it's actually 800,000 people have used the platform to ditch our architects and take on the process themselves, myself included. I'm actually right now in the process of renovating my kitchen and dining room. This is some few sketches that I've done. I've been able to create construction-ready floor plans in seconds using the platform and even visualize what this space is going to look like. We're starting with design, but we really want to own the entire construction process from start to finish, from design to connecting with professionals to automating the permitting, to be able to do all the purchasing of furniture and materials directly on the platform, to then even applying for financing, really creating massive revenue opportunities at each one of these steps. Now, backing our platform is our architecture-first foundational model. It's not built on ChatGPT or Stable Diffusion. And it's really the result of years of collaboration between industry professionals, research institutes like the Mila Institute, and technologists alike. So what we're really creating here, if you can visualize what we're doing, is we're creating the architectural brain. We're really creating AGI for architecture, if you want to put it that way. So we're really taking into account in the platform, in the model, aspects around functionality, so space constraints, program constraints, compliance, so making sure every single plan and project is fully compliant with zoning codes, the visual representation of that space, budgeting aspects, really everything that an architect would do. We come to do this and automate that on the platform, eventually being able to fully go further in the process before meeting architects or fully being able to place your architects. So on platform so far, feeding our model is over 100,000 monthly active users. And they've generated over 3 million floor plans since launching in 2023.
Okay, so let's just jump in here for just a second and kind of give some commentary about why what you're doing is super solid and maybe what a VC is hearing.
Yep.
And maybe later we'll ask you some deeper dive questions. So the first thing you did is you started with a really, really powerful comparable, right? Canva, people talk about Canva for whatever. People, immediately start thinking big dollar signs, incredible simplicity, democratizing complex workflows and tools for the everyday person.
Yeah.
And so you're immediately kind of firing up the imagination. That's a really good place to start. You're doing something that Yenev and I talk a lot about, and I talk a lot about in my advisory work, which is talking about a very concrete thing, which is helping you design your renovation, but then pointing to, hey, when we win that, there's a whole bunch of adjacencies
Absolutely.
that are massive, materials and all this kind of stuff. And so as a VC, I sort of only have to believe that you need to win one thing, but wow, if you win that thing, there's a lot of other things where you become a gateway drug to a lot of other stuff. Yeah, and you're showing this traction slide, which is the money shot, right? It's like everyone can have an idea, everyone can have a dream, everyone can have maybe think they have a model.
Yeah.
What you have is users, and users is a whole different ballgame.
I thought maybe I'd be the bad cop a little bit, Patrick, because Chris has just said a bunch of nice things. And, I was thinking about the Canva comparison because, like, on the one hand, it has some good resonance and, obviously some strong brand sort of association, as Chris noted. But in a way, it strikes me as being, you want to be a bit careful with that sort of thing because, 10 years ago, everyone was like Uber for this and Uber for that. And when I look at a space like construction and architecture and I compare it to graphic design, I don't have to tell you that this is a much more complex space, a much more regulated space, a space where you have a lot more moving parts, right? Like, yes, I'm a terrible graphic designer. I used to have to hire someone. Now I use Canva. I can create my own designs. But that's very different from building a house or renovating a home, right? And so I guess in a sense, like no comparison is perfect, but if I were being uncharitable, I'd say it overlooks the real complexity that is actually what makes your space interesting, right? And that your space is nothing like graphic design. So why would you make the comparison to Canva?
Yeah. So for the comparison to Canva is really the, when we're presenting this probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, when we started thinking about what the closest comparison was, that really was who democratized the space using transformational technology. At that point, it was Canva that was using web-based graphics to be able to really democratize the space. And we saw the same comparison of using generative AI to be able to democratize our architectural space because it's so complex with so many constraints. Fast forward to today, we'd probably compare it to, say, a Bolt or a Lovable, where you're looking at code and some more complex areas, or something like Spellbook, for example, that's doing some automation on the legal side, or Harvey. But we're trying to look at all these verticals that have been democratized using Gen AI and really being the one for architecture, right? So there's going to be AGI for each one of those verticals, but that was the closest comparison that we had, in especially within the VC world when it was quite new, right? Gen AI, we've been doing this for quite a bit.
Yeah, again, like I said, I think it makes a lot of sense. I guess maybe what I like to see when you do that, where Uber for X or Canva for Y, or Salesforce for Z is, like I said, every comparison is imperfect. So like showing a great degree of self-awareness when you do that, saying, this is the analogy we are drawing, but also being really clear about where you're quite different from that, right? Because, I think when I see a founder pitch, one of the things I worry about is that they're overlooking a whole degree of complexity and unknowns. And, not that many Uber for X startups actually became all that successful, right? Because every space is different.
And I do say within the generative space, right, you take a look at, and I'm editorializing here, but you take a look at text, image, or video, you can get those things 80% right, 90% right, and you can just make a correction. You got to get architecture and architectural designs as close to 100% right, and if not, there's great consequences, right? So there's sort of a high level of complexity with what we're doing. Yeah.
If you said you're acting as a devil's advocate, you're sort of acting actually like as the skeptical VC, and so what's really interesting for the audience here is to listen to the kind of pushback a Yanev type VC will give, and the kind of answers that Patrick has to provide, right? So as the instruction here, the instructive thing to note is, as a founder in a meeting, you can't get defensive. You can't invalidate the VC's point of view because it's their point of view, and you can't make them look.
I have a very fragile ego.
Yes, Yanev here as our proxy VC has a very fragile ego. What you need to do is sort of acknowledge the truth of the argument while being confident about your ability to solve it, but humble about the details on the way from here to there. And Patrick, you just really beautifully demonstrated that, which is to say, yeah, you're right. This is an imperfect comparison. Where the comparison is apt is that we are reducing complexity and making it easier. Another word for that is democratizing. And Canva had its own kind of complexity. And now using generative AI, we are able to solve different levels of complexity. Now, a number of months forward, you have the advantage of other comparables, right? You could have used Cursor or, as you said, other things. And so I think this is becoming well understood that there is an effort to build the next generation of tools for very complex tasks and democratize those. So it's much more well understood. In fact, the question I'd be asking now is, what's your moat? And actually, one of my questions here is, where did you get this data, and why doesn't an AutoCAD or whatever the hell the architectural tool is beat you ultimately with their distribution, their brand? So maybe you're about to address that in the next couple of slides.
Absolutely. Well, I can. It's more a high level, so I can actually jump into that first. So the first data set that we had was in collaboration with Mattamy Homes, which is the largest home builder in Canada, and then another company called, it's in French, but Dessin Drummond. So Dessin Drummond, as I like to say in French. So they supplied us with their initial floor plans that we started using as a training set. But keep in mind, this was back in end of 2021, right? So we really just started with a problem of how do we automate floor plan creation? And it was very early days when it came to generative AI. So really the knowledge of the know-how of how to create basically our first agent, which is our floor plan generation agent, and then being able to go through all the architectural steps and creating agents for all of those steps, and having context and the user data that we have right now from the 100,000 monthly active users, 800,000 users on platform. That's a very, very high significant moat for us, being able to have that data, that initial data set, and then also the architectural knowledge and know-how, and the user data as well.
Yeah, and so the question then becomes, how does one of these big software players, how do you create a moat around you for that?
Yeah, absolutely. What I find really interesting with tools like CAD or Revit, Rhino, those types of tools that are specific to the industry, is that they're very much selling to architects, right? Like, we're coming to really disrupt how architecture happens and how architects work, right? That's why we've really had a groundswell from real estate developers, home builders, anybody who's a homeowner who's looking to do the process themselves. So we don't feel like those companies are going to go more towards those segments that are more, I guess, consumer segments that you take a look at, and more traditionally break away from architectural segments. So we really see a competitive advantage there. But yeah, I mean, if we hit AGI, we'll be happy, right? Because we have plans of going even past planning and design. We'd eventually like to be able to be integrated on the hardware side as well, and having robots that are doing drywall eventually, right? Like we really see the future as evolving in that way.
So two things on that. The first is I'm maybe a little bit more pointed in my style. I would have added to what you said. The same reason Adobe can't chase Figma and Canva, right? The same reason that Visual Studio can't chase Cursor.
Yeah.
These guys are trapped in innovator's dilemma and bureaucracy and target markets. And you are going to race ahead of them and be the next $20 billion attempted acquisition a la Figma. Sadly, that didn't work out for them.
Actually, our third co-founder sold his company to Figma. So yeah, he has the inside story. He knows.
I do worry, though, now for a little bit of criticism, I do worry about your overuse of the term AGI. For me, AGI means a generative intelligence that can be applied to any domain. And it seems to me you're doing the opposite of AGI. You're doing like niche AI. And so I don't know how that landed with VCs, or tell me more about why you're saying that.
Yeah, for sure. When we think about the evolution of SaaS 2.0, which is more buttons and knobs, like we like to say, of interfaces, of users having to use interface, we see that as software that already exists, right? And we're going to be going into more of an agentic era. It's like a SaaS 3.0 era where it's been democratized, where you put in a text prompt and you're able to generate what you want. The reason that we were using architectural general intelligence or artificial general intelligence is really because anybody anywhere should be able to do any type of architectural project that they want, right? So for us,
oh, hang on a second, you're using AGI as architectural general intelligence?
Yeah,
I didn't catch that. Okay.
yeah, exactly. We talk in terms of like the advancements of systems, right? We see if we reach AGI, then obviously everybody's going to be out of work and like we're going to be facing other problems. But we like to make the comparison of like there's going to be AGI hopefully eventually, but what we're trying to do is really focus on the segment, to your point, of the architectural complexities, right, and be able to create basically a full stack automation on that side. Yeah.
So for you, AGI is architectural generative intelligence or generative.
Yeah, for me, whenever a new model comes out, like when O3 came out, O4 is going to come out, O5, etc., I always put it to the benchmark of like, if it's able to give me full construction documents, renderings, it's able to like do a quote submission and bring somebody to my house to do the renovations and maybe even pay for it, that'll be AGI. But until we reach that point, we're not there yet. Yeah. Not far away, though.
But that actually leads me to a question that I had on my mind, Patrick, which is you've talked about training your own foundation model, which is obviously expensive and difficult to do. And also, you talked about, the foundation models, the general purpose foundation models from folks like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google are constantly improving. So, it's a choice that comes with a significant downside. And I guess I'm wondering why you made the choice to build something from scratch rather than leverage a general purpose foundation model and layer in your expertise on top of that.
Absolutely. So what's really interesting is when we started working in this space in the end of 2021 into 2022, keep in mind that we wanted to generate floor plans, right? Like that was really the singular use case that we're looking at. And when we used GANs, when we used other types of AI models to be able to apply to the problem space, it didn't understand architectural constraints, architectural principles. Believe me, I wish that we could have taken OpenAI's model or an Anthropic model to be able to do it, but it really didn't work within the text space or the image space. So we really had to come up with our own model to be able to get to a point where it can generate usable floor plans. But to your point, more and more like past floor plan design. Now, if you go into like a zoning agent or a floor plan recognition agent or floor plan optimization agent, we hope to be able to leverage those models and then be able to infuse them with context and data to really be able to get to a point where we're going further within the architectural process, right? So for us, it was a choice that we had to take through necessity, but I think more and more it's going towards building out agents and the business logic between those agents having the data that feeds it versus going out and building and trying to compete with the big three, which is OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google.
How did you find that experience of building a model from nothing, and how did you I guess gather the expertise within your team to make sure you could do a good job of it?
Yeah, so we're partnered with the Mila Institute, Yoshua Bengio's Institute, one of the, I think, the largest AI institutes globally. So we're fortunate enough to be located here in Montreal, Quebec, where we have that expertise and we can leverage that. One of our advisors in the company was an early employee at DeepMind. So we're able to really lean on their expertise to be able to start building out the model. But it was a long process. It was back in 2022, and and in 2022, speaking to VCs, they saw that Gen AI was percolating a little bit, but it was like speaking another language to them, right? So I'd say that honestly we were a little bit too early to the market, which is fine because we're benefiting from that right now. But it was complex and yeah, very 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 difficult to get to a point where it can be usable within a production application.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I salute the ambition. I think definitely, really cool stuff.
Yeah, and someone on the team from DeepMind is you buried the lead a little bit there. I would have perhaps led with the team there because that's also helpful to know.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, FlowHealth, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
Let's let you get through the rest of your slides here before we keep peppering you with questions.
Absolutely. So for us, the focus over the next quarters here is really building out, as I was mentioning, the virtual architect, right? So moving from that agentic SaaS 2.0, the interface SaaS 2.0 buttons and knobs to more of an agentic interface where somebody can put in a text prompt, be generating floor plans, be generating renderings, etc. That really makes sense across the board. And making sure that these plans and what they're generating is compliant with local zoning codes, right? So being able to develop localized zoning agents are able to cross-reference data and saying the floor plan that you're generating makes sense, doesn't make sense, et cetera, and be able to synthesize that data. And then moving to a little bit more of a platform side of things is developing templates that people can use as a starting point and say, well, I don't necessarily know what I want to start from. Is there different libraries of templates that I can start from for a new home or renovation project? And then being able to add in collaboration, right? I mentioned here that this deck was done a few quarters ago, and this was still more in the SaaS 2.0 era. More and more, we're going into the SaaS 3.0 area that's a lot more agentic. So some of these tools like templating and collaboration are going to be baked in, which is just going to be a one-click share. You can just say that you want to share the design, but that's really the focus for us over the next few quarters here.
So there are a couple of reasons why I like two of those things in particular, and I'd like to chat to you about one as well. The first is templates are a no-brainer. If you're building something for users and it's possible to do quite complex things, piece together complex workflows, build complex architectural designs, or what have you, the number one way to reduce that complexity and accelerate the aha moment is to have an incredible onboarding experience, ask a few questions, and just give them a template. So that's really important to help accelerate people through your product. If you don't have that already, but yet you have so many users, that's a good sign that you can further accelerate that growth, and that's good. As a VC, I'm hearing, oh, wow, they did all that without templates and starters.
Yeah, we did a lot with a little.
And the other thing I like very much is the real-time collaboration. I think Google Docs, Figma, and those kind of tools, I think one of their underrated killer features is the real-time collaboration. It's not just that it's in a browser. It's not just that it's more modern. It's not just that the tool may be a bit easier. It's really about live interaction. And so, I mean, if you're able to crack the code on that and have a Figma or modern Canva version of live interaction around things, I think that's very, very powerful. The question I have for you is around the virtual architect. And this is more sharing my opinion with the audience, but also I'll try to understand where you guys are landing. I'm quite skeptical about chat-first interfaces for complex workflows. And what I really, really enjoy is what Descript recently did, and what I suspect Figma is starting to do and will do more of, which is to say, no, our authoring environment with buttons and waveforms and sliders, that is absolutely critical. Like that's the game for fine-tuned, opinionated tweaking and interaction with our tool. But the chat interface is a way to sort of do broad stroke changes within that tool. And so, I think I heard you say we're going to switch to just a chat interface. Please allay my fears that you're going to interact with those two things.
That's a good point. Like, so I'll shed some light on that. So definitely going from what we have now to your point, a little bit more of a chat interface, but it's with contextual UI, right? So the way that you would use a Lovable, a Bolt, even a Chat GPT, right, where you have the context and the conversation going on one side, and then you have the Canva of what you're creating on the right side of the screen or in that UI to be able to make the changes that you want to, be able to surface the UI elements that you need to at the right time, right? So that's going to be part of the agentic orchestration that we have on the platform, is really being able to surface that information and that contextual UI at the right time and not just have a chat interface. It's interesting because like starting a few years ago, nobody expected that ChatGPT's interface was obviously going to become sort of standard within Gen AI apps. But now we're getting this a lot from users of saying like, hey, I want to use it like ChatGPT, right? So obviously we have to address that from a user expectation standpoint. But it's going to be a hybrid to your point where it's like if you're building a website, right? You have to have that graphic element to be able to make changes. So we're approaching it from a little bit more of a contextual UI plus chat, and then eventually being able to integrate a voice. So it's more of a voice with a contextual UI.
Yeah, users have to be able to grab the deliverable, grab the asset, and physically manipulate it, because trying to like control the output by talking over someone's shoulder, which is what you're doing with an agent, is just disastrously painful. And sometimes you just want to move a pixel. And so I think that's just for all the founders out there, product managers, product designers, like for the love of God, please don't think you can throw out the UX. It's really, really important.
Yeah, I would actually note on this topic that, we're talking about ChatGPT, but even ChatGPT and Claude now have their canvas modes, right? Which is, it's still text, but already the idea that you have just a chat is going away, right? And canvas mode is it basically creates a document that you then collaborate on. So I think even within the pure sort of chatbots, the idea of just having chat without having any other affordances for the user is slowly going away.
And Sora does a lot more of this as well, right? They have their timeline and their ability to splice and things. So Sora is like a very simple rudimentary reference app demonstration of what we're talking about. Descript, and I think Figma is starting to flirt with this. Descript just announced an incredible thing. The CEO did in a great video. It's going to change the way our workflow works on the podcast, where the chat's down the left, but all your Descript controls are right there. And I think that's the future.
Yeah, and that's really one of the the major product change that we're doing, and major hat off to our chief product officer who's freshly with us. Really is tackling that interface that we currently have. And to your point, really making it easy and feel good and smooth to use with contextual UI. But then it's picking up on information. If you made a change with the zoning agent, for example, that then gets reflected with your floor plan generation agent or your optimization agent to make sure that data is talking to each other, right? So it's really collapsing some interfaces, but being able to have a nice contextual UI when you need it.
Any other slides for us?
Yeah, there's more vision slides, but I always ask, if you had the opportunity to invest in Canva, would you have taken it, right? So our vision is our vision is really if everyone could have access to beautiful architecture at a fraction of the cost. And I always like to say generative AI is a catalyst and we are the enabler.
I think it's really good. Obviously this has been a successful pitch deck for you. I nearly wonder if you could go harder. Like Chris said, I think one advantage you have is you're pitching to VCs, obviously, who demographically tend to be relatively wealthy people, which means they have probably gone through the process of a build or a renovation or something. So they have a personal experience with this process. And I think, again, I was, challenging the Canva comparison. I think one of the things that also is true about building and renovation that is less true about graphic design is it's an absolute goddamn nightmare. Yes, it's expensive to use an architect, and you're starting with architecture, but the point is the whole process is slow, costly, error-prone, conflict-strewn, and all of that. So I nearly feel like, that the big vision framing is like, yeah, you make this cheaper, you're democratizing it, but you're actually fixing an industry that from the sort of customer point of view is in a lot of ways broken.
Absolutely.
That to me would really resonate.
Absolutely. And I'll give you a personal example as well. Like I have two co-founders. One of my co-founder, he's an architectural technologist, architect by trades, been in the industry for about 15 years. He lived this with his customers, whether they be home builders or individuals. So he really lived it. And our chief product officer, he 3 times exited founder, sold his company to Groupon, another one to Figma, another one to Slack. And he's in the last 4 years has been renovating his house in Vancouver. And he's like, I feel this pain, right? Like this is really personal to me and this should exist. And I'm in the process of renovating my kitchen and dining room and seeing the process of collaborating with the professionals. So it really is a personal element to a lot of people. It's pretty rare that they haven't thought about renovation or building. That's what really drives us is like, we feel the pain, we felt the pain, right? And we just want to make it better for everybody involved.
I think another point on that yeah, I think you sort of touched on in the deck, but like is really interesting to me when you look at the pain, right? You've very much focused on being like a virtual architect. One of the areas of pain I've seen is actually in the handoffs between the different professionals, from architect to engineer to general contractor to, you know, potentially a, you know, zoning specialist or, you know, someone who works with local government to get these things approved. They kind of speak different languages, right? It's quite common to get an architectural design that the engineer looks at or the general contractor looks like and says, you know, this violates the laws of physics. You know, a good architect hopefully doesn't do that. But, you know, there are a lot of these constraints and a lot of expense and tension and anxiety that comes through those handoffs. So to me, you know, one of the potential pieces of this bit of software is that you start to break down the distinction between architect, engineer, or contractor, and you start to have a more unified view of, you know, taking a vision into reality.
And that's how we're thinking about agents, right? Like, and that's really some of the complexity of how we're dealing with. You have agents that the floor plan generation agent was, you know, quite complex to do. We have then an inspiration agent that we're going to work on as well. I can pull in Pinterest ideas, et cetera, and get to a decision point. But a good example of that is like an HVAC agent, right? Where we're going to think about plumbing, electrical, it's an MEP agent, but being able to really understand how that interacts with the plan and then be able to have the file compatibilities in case a professional needs to jump in, right? So a lot of the complexity is making sure the agent works from an agentic standpoint, then making sure the data flows from one agent to the next, and then you can get the output that the professional needs, right? So there's a lot of engineering complexity to what we're building for sure.
You know, I think to Yanev's point about this analogy to a Canva has its limitations, and you know, he's raising some of the missed opportunities and the potential blowback of making that comparison. I think Yanev actually, it's easy to forget how mysterious and mystical and complicated design was to make something that looks good, that follows brand guidelines, that is a collaborative process, that has multiple revisions, that you're not, you know, trying to micromanage some designer who doesn't have your aesthetic. Design was incredibly complicated before a Figma or a Canva. And I think your opportunity, Patrick, is to tell a little bit more of the story of how this is like Canva, you know, democratizing these difficulties, and then how it's even more important than Canva because construction and renovations are even more difficult, as Yanev is pointing out, the handoffs and the engagement with regulations and all this kind of stuff. So putting that at the beginning may have allayed skeptical Yanev's VC mind.
Yeah, and what could have helped as well is, and I didn't necessarily even mention in the pitch just for time constraints, but I'm a classically trained graphic designer, right? So I've used the Photoshops, I've used Illustrator. I intrinsically know what good design looks like, and I also know what Canva's done to the industry, and thankfully it's made the world a lot better looking place, right? So to your point, I could have maybe surfaced that a little bit more for sure.
But I really also think you've massively buried the lead with your team. So any early stage founder pitching their company who has your pedigree of team, Patrick, should have been the first slide, right? It's like, we have X DeepMind, you know, X founder sold to Figma, whatever. And so it's like, whatever the hell you're going to say, it's going to be like, take my money. There's like 2 or 3 things that make VCs basically say, take my money, at least smart money in Silicon Valley, which is a team with incredible pedigree. It's sort of like, I don't care what they're building. They're going to figure it out. They're going to, you know, they know how to do this. Incredible traction, which is, I don't need to wonder whether they're going to figure it out. They've already figured it out. The only thing they need to do now is not fuck it up. Or incredibly hard tech. And when I say hard tech, I don't mean what a lot of second, third tier markets consider IP. I mean, like, you've figured out how to make a self-driving car. And so you have a lot of traction, but you didn't quite lead with that. and you have an incredible team, depending on the stage you're at, I probably would have at least had a team slide somewhere
Yeah,
in there.
for sure. And we've been growing the team as well, right? So it's like we've also added some more people to the team. So we're going to be reviewing a little bit of that pitch and being able to bring the team slide a little bit sooner, for sure.
So yeah, a couple of things, Patrick, that sort of by omission spring my interest in that slide deck. So first of all, you talk about the great traction that you have, but you haven't described your go-to-market approach, how you actually get that traction. And, as a side note to that, like one of the things I see when you do this is you are trying to disrupt an industry, right? You mentioned that's the difference between you and AutoCAD and so on. So a lot of architects must hate you, right? And so you
depends which one.
But when you're disrupting an industry that has a lot of established relationships and so on, you're probably going to encounter some resistance. So I'm just sort of curious about how you're cracking into this market and how you actually have had so much traction.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we initially started, we were really very, very early within the organic around generative AI and architecture, AI architecture, et cetera. So we actually had incredible organic growth from what we built so far. That's how we saw the traction go from basically 0 users in 2023 all the way up to 800,000 users in a quick time frame. So we're backlinked heavily within different websites. Obviously, search is changing. We're getting referenced by LLMs as well, which is helping with that organic side. And it's really been everybody who wants to go further in the process before meeting an architect that's been using the platform, right? That doesn't mean that architects don't use the platform. There's some early adopters within the architectural space that are using the platform. Younger architects are looking to go quicker within the practice, but it's not a huge focus for us just in terms of market size and traction.
Okay, so basically your go-to-market really has been kind of direct. You're not partnering or anything like that. You're basically investing in SEO and other sort of publicity, and people find you.
Exactly. They find us, organically. So amazing amount of organic. We have about between 35 and about 40,000 new users on a monthly basis. And from more of a B2B side, that's a little bit more of a direct outbound outreach that we're doing in Canada, United States via cold calling, cold emailing, et cetera, using our SDR team. And we have a customer, for example, in Japan, it was a home builder that's using it, that's going to be using it locally as well, right? So
I was going to ask, like, what geographies you operate in, or are you global? Because obviously there are a lot of local conditions that go into building.
We're very much global. We have we have geographies that really interest us. So as I mentioned, Japan, we're actually going to visit our customer within the next few days here that we just signed within the Japanese market. South Korea is another interesting market for us. The UAE, we have some investors in the UAE and they're building massively. Obviously, United States and Canada is a big market for us, but we have global traction. Really, anybody from anywhere basically has a touch with the platform.
So tell me, when you say a large customer in Japan, who specifically, what category are they in?
Yeah, so they're a home builder. They're listed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, Libwork, LIBWORK. Yep.
So this is another thing that, I talk about a lot on the podcast.
Yep.
Is the question of who are you disrupting? The biggest mistake, I will say, in the top 5 mistakes that founders make, inexperienced founders make, especially in second, third tier markets, is to figure out who's already in the space and treat them like a customer. So they would take what you're doing and they'd say, oh, we make architecture better and we're going to go to architects and convince them to change their business to using our tool. And because the architects already have all the customers and it's going to be fantastic. Now, it's just like,
I have really experience. So it's like, we tried that. It didn't work.
Yeah. Everybody for some reason seems to try this and this kind of approach. It is both intuitive and stupid.
Yeah.
Like it's just,
absolutely.
It's, I'm sorry, but it's just like, it's just a bad idea. You have to ask yourself, who does this hurt as much as who does it help? And oftentimes a lot of founders will pick the people that it hurts or could hurt, and they'll go partner with them. And we have a whole episode in our back catalog about this, about the partnership and enterprise customer doom loop, the doom funnel. And so I just want to impress upon all the founders listening, stop trying to optimize complexity and instead disrupt it. Instead of partnering with incumbents, instead destroy them. And this is for most top people most of the time, who are trying to make the world a better place, a more democratized place, the end user experience better. In your case, the experience of people with homes trying to renovate those homes. They're the end users. You want to ask yourself, how can I cut the middleman out? How can I have less personas and dependencies and layers of abstraction? Who am I disrupting? And so this is very powerful. Canva didn't go to designers. They went to everyday people, right? Uber didn't go to taxi. They went to independent drivers and everyday people. And so this is just really very, very powerful. Everybody and their dog will tell you it's riskier. You delay revenue. There's no big ticket enterprise sales. Break even is further away and all this. And it's more, nonsense. B2B and B2C are both risky. The problem with B2B, when you're partnering with incumbents that you should be disrupting, is that the risk is that they just don't digest the dog food and they kill you flat and you're stuck behind gatekeepers. So please consider that as a founder.
And I'd like to add to that point as well. If you take a look at the architectural industry and how tooling's been built for architects and maybe, builders as a whole, you have to go so deep within the software solution to be able to capture a market that really hasn't changed for a really long time, right? So you really have to invest millions and millions of dollars to be able to create a tool for an architect to say, maybe I'll change from CAD, maybe I'll change from Revit, right?
And not only is the tool chain a nightmare, is their expectations are a nightmare. Their expectations are up here, right? They're not the minimum viable problem and minimum viable product. Now, in the fullness of time, Patrick, you will become an incredible tool that many junior or smart architects will use as their first port of call to roughly sketch something out. The same way some designers even use Canva. But that's the fullness of time. That's not your first port of call.
Exactly. Yeah. And we made that mistake, right? When we were just freshly going out into the market, we said it's going to be by architects for architects. And it was interesting because not only did we get disproven within those conversations, but the market and the traction was telling us, it was disproving that as well. I want to be able to do this myself, right? So we were listening to the market and the customers coming through as well.
Now the other thing that again, an omission that I'm fascinated about is monetization. So you talked about traction in terms of users. I don't know if you're charging those users, but also in my mind, turning over in my mind as I look at the deck, because I think an investor is always asking questions in their head even before they ask you, right? I'm like, there are a lot of different potential ways of monetizing a tool like this. And so, having a strategy or a view on how you intend to monetize it is something that I'd be really fascinated about and, understand where this is all going.
Yeah, absolutely. So far, the way that we've done monetization has been very, very simple, right? To your point, we've been focusing a lot more on data collection to be able to make the agents better, the platform better, really being able to collect all that data that we can. We've been charging a very simple software subscription where somebody can sign up. It's $30 per month. They can use it. But it hasn't been very well segmented for a professional, like a home builder that could be using it, or an individual that might be using it, right? So we're in the process of splitting those, where home builders will be paying an ACV of between 12 and 15,000 annually currently. And then individual users, we're going to be having less and less revenue that comes from them currently, because we just really want a little bit more of their data to be able to feed the models, right? So that's how we're thinking about monetization. But eventually, we're going to be moving more towards an output-based monetization, right? When we get to the architectural general intelligence, you can generate a plan, you can generate renderings, you can generate construction documents. We're going to be charging $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 for that package, because it'll ultimately be able to replace a lot of the professional fees you like to have, right? So we're going to be moving. We have a simple just ARR SaaS business right now. Think that medium long term it's going to be going a little bit more towards that, plus output based pricing as well.
So it would be fair to say you haven't optimized for revenue at this point.
Not at this point, yeah.
And I think there's a really valuable lesson here. It's something we do talk about on this podcast a lot. But I think some less experienced founders, and also a lot, I would say, of lower quality investors, like to focus on revenue as a key metric from very early on. And I think that's often shooting yourself in the foot. And a couple of things you just mentioned are examples of why that would be shooting yourself in the foot, right? One is the data collection itself is a moat. It's part of your flywheel, right? So if you put a paywall up or a really prohibitive paywall up in front of it, then you're not going to get that data. And the other thing is it pulls your attention away from what you're actually trying to do, right? It stops you from getting that traction in the first place that you can then leverage. And so, when I asked that question about monetization, I think it's really, your answer was great. And I think it shows a subtle distinction, right? Which is startups are all about making money, right? That is why investors invest in them. So it's not that revenue isn't important, but it's about taking that longer time horizon, which is to say, eventually we have a clear strategy on how to turn that into a cash volcano. So I do like to see a monetization slide, but it's not about how much money are we making right now, or are we squeezing all the cash out of the current user base that we can, but do we have a thoughtful strategy to get us there eventually, where we are really generating the sorts of revenue and the sorts of profits that allow the business to be valued, to provide the returns to the investors that are what they are looking for.
It says a lot about the Silicon Valley ecosystem, where you've raised the majority of your money, that you don't even have a monetization slide, and that you expressed your traction as users, not as revenue. Everyone who's listening to the sound of my voice in Australia and India and Europe and Canada and everywhere else, wake up, right? These guys and everyone like them in Silicon Valley are raising capital not on revenue. They're raising it on upside potential and growth, and the pedigree of the founders and the pedigree of the problem. And while you're screwing around and screwing your founders to focus on big ticket sales, these other players are eating their lunch. And it's not just the data moat, Yaniv and Patrick, I'm sure you're thinking about this. The game is a game of racing to win. The first to scale wins. The first to de facto standard wins. The first to network effect wins. You want all of these families, all of these builders, all of these people familiar with your tool before all of the 1,700 other people trying to do what you're doing catch you. And so you need to get rid of any headwind, trying to squeeze every last dollar out of this thing, get it out of the way so you become the winner and own the ecosystem. And then you become, you can tax the fiefdom as the king, as the landlord in your castle. You can tax the fiefdom all day long when you win. And one of the ways you can win, you mentioned this, is going into marketplaces around materials and connecting to builders and connecting to professional vendors. There's a whole world of monetization there.
Financing.
Exactly. So you have to think three-dimensionally, guys. And I'm, everyone we've had on the spotlight so far just thinks this way implicitly. Yeah. And there's a reason why, by the way, guys, we have these founders on the show. We get a lot of pitches to be on the show from founders,
a lot,
and from all over the place. And we select them very carefully, Patrick, because we're looking for people who demonstrate the values we talk about on the show. So congrats to you for doing such a great job with this. And,
thanks.
And it's a lot to learn from this kind of pitch.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. And just thinking again about that monetization slide, I said, I like to see one because it shows that you're thinking about it, but I'm interested in your thought process why there isn't, but I could certainly see the case to be said that, well, for a sophisticated VC, there are clearly monetization opportunities once you reach a level of scale. There are so many that it's not even really that important to point them out, because it's kind of, your pitch deck should be focusing on the things that are less certain. Like, are you able to actually create a product like this? What is your pedigree? Are you able to get cut through in the industry, get that traction, that usage, that data moat? And of course, if you have all those things, then the money will follow, and you have a whole buffet of options as to how you're going to, I guess, extract some revenue out of the value that you are delivering to the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've seen it with, say, with Canva and how they've monetized. You see it with Uber, how they've monetized as well. They really make an incredible experience, an incredible product that feels good and has a lot of value to it. And then they turn on monetization and really hits an exponential point. And even the more extreme example is OpenAI. It's Sam Altman, when he raises first billion for what would become ChatGPT, it's like we don't even know if this is going to work, right? And then they got to a point where it did work, and they got to a point where they could monetize through 50 different ways, right? And ultimately, if you own AGI, you're obviously, there's incredible monetization potential. So to your point, that's how we're thinking about the market.
Now, to be fair, just to provide the devil's advocate story here and the counter argument to the counter argument, most founders are not in Silicon Valley. They're not talking to smart money, and they are being asked these monetization questions, and they're being forced down these roads and to reckon with these issues. And what I would say to you is, number one, you are not tied to your chair. Get up and go somewhere else. And number two, send these episodes, we talk about it a lot, to all your VC friends to politely ask them to step their game up.
Although, to be fair, like as a counter to your counter to the counter, Chris, Patrick is coming to us from Montreal, Canada, so not in Silicon Valley, which seems like a very good choice right now. Congratulations on your recent democratic election. Everyone accepted the results of.
And your peaceful transfer of power.
People don't care about politics here. They're just like,
Elbows up, right? But more seriously, the fact is that you are in Montreal, but you have raised from Silicon Valley. And I think Chris's point is maybe it would have been easier if you'd moved to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
But we all have, we're all complete people. We make choices, right?
So I'm not saying you have to physically move necessarily, but you do have to get up and start, tapping into that market. And, the way you have, Patrick. And Montreal's startup ecosystem is actually quite sophisticated. And, I would say they've learned some of these lessons more deeply than some other ecosystems as well. So you're in a pretty good ecosystem, not the AAA, whatever, Silicon Valley. You have gone and tapped those money resources. You don't necessarily have to physically move the whole team there, and so on, especially now in a distributed world. But just don't settle for what's immediately around you.
Absolutely.
That's my point.
Yeah, absolutely. And we really love, being in Canada, being in Quebec, because of really the support of the government here when it comes to government grants, really like the talent pool that's available here through Mila and others. It's really, the dollar really does go a longer way here, right? So it's really, you can do a lot more with less, which is really interesting from a capitalization perspective. But to your point, you have to have that global ambition to be able to tap into those markets, to be able to fuel your growth locally. We've had great companies here be able to do a lot of successes. You look at Lightspeed, you look at Shopify was in Ontario, but Shopify, you have Passwordbox, was sold to Intel a while back. All those companies originated from here, right? So it doesn't mean that you can't create a unicorn from here, but it's definitely a different set of challenges for sure.
Patrick, been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Likewise.
Thank you for opening the kimono, so to speak, and giving us all a peek at your pitch and letting us pepper you with questions. How can people sign up and use the product, follow you and your work personally? How can they find you on the internet?
Absolutely. So you can visit our website at maket.ai or .ca if you're in Canada. So you can sign up, start using the platform. It's going to change quite a bit, and we're bringing some improvements to the platform. And then you can connect with me on LinkedIn directly. That's the best place to find me. I'm a little bit more of a lurker on X, as they like to call it now.
You're not participating in the cesspool of hate speech and anti-Semitism?
No, it's all AI hype news. So I'm like, I get super excited. We have a dedicated Slack channel, and I think my team is a little bit annoyed of being bombarded with it.
Awesome.
But anyway, thanks so much, Patrick, also from me. And also, maybe another lesson, I should note that due to a miscommunication between myself and Chris, we didn't actually tell you what the format of this show would be.
That's fine.
So you just pulled out a pitch deck and went ahead. And so first of all, thank you for doing that. Apologies for the miscommunication, but also a lesson here, which is always be ready to pitch.
ABC, always be closing. Yanev, how can people find you on the internet?
Okay, I'm on LinkedIn, definitely not a lurker. I post a lot of stuff there, try to make it a less boring place. I love accepting connection requests from TSP listeners, so I've gotten quite a few lately. Just let me know that you're a listener in your connection request, and I will happily accept it. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, you can learn more about me at chrissard.com and my advisory over at chrissard.com/advisory. You can also add me on LinkedIn, mention you're from the show, and I will add you too. How's that? I've changed my mind.
Oh, you copycat.
All right, awesome, guys. Well, thanks for joining us, Patrick. And as always, thank you for listening. We'll join you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. And Patrick, all the best.
Thank you.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.